I wasn't trying to uncover anything. That detail matters. It wasn't an investigation. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't nostalgia. I was just cleaning the house. That house had always been far too big for the number of people who had lived in it. Long corridors, doors that were almost never opened, and a constant, heavy silence, as if the house were always listening. From childhood, I learned that there were places in that house that simply weren't used, not because they were locked, but because no one had any reason to go in. The library was one of those places. It was at the back of the house, far from the common areas, a vast room with entire walls covered in dark wooden shelves, old books, many of them never touched, elegant armchairs arranged almost theatrically, as if someone had stood up from them and never returned. No one read in that room. We never did. Even so, it was always impeccably kept. That alone should have unsettled me much earlier. That day, I decided to organize some old boxes stacked near one of the bookcases. Boxes that clearly hadn't been opened for years, perhaps decades. Old documents, letters without recipients, papers with dates that no longer meant anything. Until I found a different envelope. It had no name, no date, no markings. It was made of thicker paper, yellowed by time, too heavy to be empty. When I touched it, I felt something strange, as if that object had been waiting for that exact moment. It may sound exaggerated now, but that was precisely how it felt. I opened the envelope. Inside, there was only one thing: a photograph. It was an old photograph, black and white, with uneven edges, worn down by time. From the type of paper and the quality of the image, it was clear it wasn't an ordinary copy. It was the original. I placed the photograph on the library table, the same solid wooden table that appears in the image you saw on the cover of this video. And then, for the first time, I really looked at it. At first glance, it seemed to be just a family photograph. 6 people standing in a line, side by side. Men in suits, women in long, elegant dresses typical of another era. They were all serious. There were no exaggerated smiles, no sense of ease. It was the kind of photograph wealthy families used to take only once to record something they considered too important to be forgotten. And the strangest part, I recognized every face. Or, at least, I thought I did. My grandfather was there, my grandmother as well. 2 uncles, an aunt, all of them already deceased. It was impossible not to feel a weight in my chest as I looked at image. But nothing seemed wrong. Not yet. The problem began when my eyes drifted away from the center of the photograph. Almost by chance. Towards the right-hand corner. There was something that didn't belong in the image. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, perhaps a flaw in the paper, or a strange reflection. But the longer I looked, the more it took shape. It was a silhouette, a human figure. It wasn't aligned with the rest of the family. It wasn't posing. It wasn't looking at the camera. It seemed to be watching. And the most disturbing thing, no one in the photograph appeared to notice its presence. There were no exchanged glances, no reactions, nothing. As if that figure was there, but wasn't meant to be. My first instinct was to turn the photograph over. On the back, there was something handwritten. The handwriting was firm, old-fashioned. Just one short sentence. Summer of 1988. I did the math immediately. 36 years. 36 years since that photograph was taken. 36 years forgotten inside an envelope in a room no one used. And yet, no one had ever mentioned that image. Not the silhouette, not the impossible detail. That was the moment when things began to fall into place. The house that was too big, the rooms that were never occupied, the conversations that always died before they began. That photograph hadn't been forgotten by accident. It had been hidden. And the worst thought came right after. If that figure was there in 1988, why did no one ever talk about it? And more importantly, who was that person who didn't exist in any family story?
That was when I made my first mistake. I decided to ask.
I waited until the evening to ask, not because I was afraid, or at least that's what I told myself, but because I wanted to be certain that the photograph was real, that I hadn't imagined the detail, that exhaustion hadn't played a trick on me. I looked at it again and again throughout the afternoon. Each time, the same conclusion. The figure was still there. My father was in the dining room when I finally brought it up. He was sitting at the head of the table, reading the way he always did, calm, composed, untouched by the passage of time. He had inherited the house, the posture, and the habit of never reacting too quickly. I placed the photograph on the table. He didn't look at it immediately. That, in hindsight, was the first sign. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He adjusted his glasses, glanced down, and froze. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Enough for someone who had known him all their life to notice. "That's an old picture," he said, carefully. "Where did you find it?" "In the library, inside an envelope." He nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something only he could see. "That room should have been cleared years ago." I waited. Silence filled the space between us. Then I asked the question I had been holding back. "There's someone else in the photo." He looked up at me. For the first time that day, his eyes weren't calm. They were alert, calculating. He said, "There are 6 people." "No," I replied. "There are 7." He reached for the photograph and pulled it closer, studied it. Longer than necessary. Then he turned it face down on the table. I will never forget that gesture. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was deliberate. "That picture doesn't matter," he said. "It's old. People see things when they want to." I leaned forward. "Who is the man in the corner?" That was when my father stood up. Slowly, controlled, as if standing was a way to regain authority over the conversation. "You shouldn't be looking at things you don't understand." Something inside me shifted. Not fear, recognition. This wasn't denial. This was avoidance. You were alive in 1988. You were there." His jaw tightened. That summer was complicated. The word complicated echoed in my head. It was the same word he had used whenever the past came too close. I pressed further. Why isn't he standing with the others? No answer. Why isn't he looking at the camera? Still nothing. And why, I continued, does no one in the photo seem to notice him at all? That was when my father finally looked at me. Truly looked. "You need to let this go," he said quietly. Not angrily. Not defensively. As if he were issuing a warning. I picked up the photograph again. "There's something else," I said. He stiffened. "The envelope," I continued. "There was only this photo inside. No letters, no notes, no explanation." He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then he spoke. "We didn't think it would survive." That sentence landed harder than anything else he could have said. We didn't think it would survive. Survive what? He hesitated, then shook his head. "It's late. You're tired. We'll talk another time." But there would be no another time. Because that night I couldn't sleep. And the photograph didn't stay where I left it. I woke up around 3 in the morning. The house was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that feels intentional. I went to the library. The table was empty. The photograph was gone. I searched everywhere. Drawers. Shelves. Boxes. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. Except I remembered it. Every detail. Every face. Every shadow. And that was when I realized something else. The man in the corner of the photograph wasn't standing still. When I had first seen the image, he was partially obscured. When I looked again later that day, his outline seemed clearer. Closer. Not by much, but enough. Enough to suggest that the photograph hadn't captured a moment. It had captured a process. And suddenly, the question was no longer who he was, but when he would arrive.
At first, no one wanted to talk about the photograph, not because it was unclear, but because it was too clear. The image showed 4 people standing in the garden of the family's old house: the father, the mother, their eldest son, and someone else. Someone who, according to every official record, should not have existed. When the photo resurfaced, the family tried to dismiss it as a mistake, a trick of light, a distant relative, an old neighbor passing at the wrong moment. But that explanation collapsed the moment the negatives were found. The photograph had been taken in 1988, developed in a local studio, archived, cataloged, and stored away with dozens of others. There had been no manipulation, no editing, no alteration. What made it worse was the background. Behind the figures, partially hidden by the shadows of the trees, stood the back door of the house, wide open. That door had not been opened in over 3 decades. The eldest son was the first to notice something unsettling: the posture. Everyone else in the photo stood naturally, relaxed shoulders, uneven weight, casual stances, except one figure. The man on the far left. He stood perfectly straight, arms pressed unnaturally against his sides, head tilted ever so slightly downward, as if he were not posing, but waiting. When the sun zoomed in on the face, he felt a sudden, irrational chill. There was no expression, not neutral, not calm, empty, as though the face had been copied from somewhere else and placed onto a human body without fully understanding how emotions worked. The family decided to trace the origin of the photograph. They returned to the old studio where it had been developed. The shop no longer existed, but the records did. Boxes of handwritten logs, receipts, client notes. And there it was, a single line written in faded blue ink. Family of 4, extra exposure reported. Client insisted it was intentional. Extra exposure. In photography terms, that usually meant light distortion. But the technician who had written the note had added something unusual beside it. A small symbol, a circle crossed twice. No one could explain what it meant. Things escalated when the mother remembered something she had not thought about in years. On the day the photograph was taken, she recalled hearing footsteps upstairs. At the time, she assumed it was the wind, but the house was empty. No guests, no neighbors, no relatives, only the family. And yet, that night, she had locked every door before sleeping, except one, the back door. The investigation widened. Old neighbors were contacted. Friends from that period were questioned. Most remembered nothing unusual, but one woman hesitated. She had lived across the street in the late 80s. When shown the photograph, her face drained of color. She pointed at the unfamiliar figure. "I used to see him," she said quietly, "standing in the garden, always at dusk." She was certain of one thing. He never entered the house. He only watched it. That's when the son made a decision. He would return to the house, not to live there, not to renovate it, but to see if the photograph had captured something that never truly left. When he unlocked the back door for the first time in 36 years, it opened effortlessly, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the air was cold, unnaturally so, and in the dust on the wooden floor, leading from the garden into the house, were footprints. Only one set. The footprints did not lead far. They began at the back door and ended halfway down the corridor. No sign of struggle, no scattered dust, no second pair of steps. Just a clean, deliberate stop. As if whoever had entered the house had simply ceased to exist. The son stood there for several minutes, unable to move, listening to the silence press against his ears. The house felt smaller than he remembered, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. Then he noticed something else. A smell. Old paper, damp wood, and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. Blood. The corridor led to a room that had always been locked. Even during their childhood, that door was never opened. The parents had called it storage, but no one could remember a single box ever coming out of it. The key was still on the hook in the kitchen. When he unlocked the door, the hinges screamed, a long, strained cry, as if the room itself objected to being disturbed. Inside, there was no furniture. Only walls. And photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned taped, nailed directly into the plaster. Every single one was of the house, from different years, different seasons, different angles. Some showed the family laughing in the garden. Others showed empty rooms, dark windows at night. The back door, always the back door. And in many of them, there was a figure, sometimes distant, sometimes partially obscured, sometimes standing impossibly close to the camera. Always the same posture, always the same empty face. At the center of the room hung one photograph larger than the rest. It was the same image that had resurfaced after 36 years. But this version was different, clearer, sharper, and horrifyingly honest. The family stood together as before, but now it was obvious. There were 5 people. The unfamiliar man was not standing beside them, he was standing behind them, hands resting gently on their shoulders. The son felt his stomach tighten as he noticed writing on the back of the photograph. A message written in his father's handwriting. He arrived before the house was finished. He said he would watch over us. We believed him. Memory began to return in fragments. Late-night arguments behind closed doors, his mother crying without explanation, his father pacing the garden at dusk, speaking softly to someone who was not there. And one night, a night the son had never been able to explain. He remembered waking up and seeing a man standing at the foot of his bed. Not threatening, not moving, just watching. When the son screamed, the man had vanished. The next morning, his parents told him it had been a nightmare. They had lied. Buried beneath the photographs, he found a notebook, his mother's. The final entries were rushed, shaking. He doesn't protect us. He collects us. He appears in pictures because he cannot exist without being seen. The house doesn't belong to us. We belong to him. The last sentence chilled him more than anything else. If anyone finds this, don't acknowledge him, don't photograph him, don't remember him. The son heard a sound behind him. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. He did not turn around. Instead, he felt something rest gently on his shoulder. A hand. Cold. Familiar. A voice spoke. Calm, almost kind. You finally noticed me.
The son did not scream. He did not turn around. He understood now. This was not a confrontation. There was no escape written into this story. The hand on his shoulder felt solid, yet wrong. Too still, too patient. You were always the observant one, the voice said softly, even as a child. The son finally faced him. The man was exactly as he appeared in the photographs, unchanged, unaged, unblinking. A presence rather than a person. You lived here, the son said, his voice barely audible. You lived with us. The man smiled, not with warmth, but with satisfaction. I was invited. The walls around them seemed to listen.
Your parents needed protection. They needed certainty. They needed to believe the house would keep them safe. The man's fingers tightened slightly. And I needed to be remembered. The truth unfolded with cruel simplicity. The man did not haunt the house. The house sustained him. Every photograph, every memory, every moment he was noticed, that was how he remained. That is why I appear in images, he explained. The son did not scream. He did not turn around. He understood now. This was not a confrontation. There was no escape written into this story. The hand on his shoulder felt solid, yet wrong. Too still, too patient. You were always the observant one, the voice said softly, even as a child. The son finally faced him. The man was exactly as he appeared in the photographs, unchanged, unaged, unblinking. A presence rather than a person. You lived here, the son said, his voice barely audible. You lived with us. The man smiled, not with warmth, but with satisfaction. I was invited. The walls around them seemed to listen. Your parents needed protection. They needed certainty. They needed to believe the house would keep them safe. The man's fingers tightened slightly, and I needed to be remembered. The truth unfolded with cruel simplicity. The man did not haunt the house. The house sustained him. Every photograph, every memory, every moment he was noticed, that was how he remained. That is why I appear in images, he explained. A witness fixes me in place. The son glanced back at the photographs lining the walls. Generations of proof, generations of silence. How many families? He asked. The man did not answer. He didn't need to. The moment your parents tried to forget me, they disappeared. The son's breath caught. They thought destruction would work. They burned the earliest photographs. They sealed this room. A pause. But forgetting me is what finally allowed me to take them. The hand left the son's shoulder. For the first time, the man stepped back. You have a choice, he said calmly. Do what they could not. The son looked at the notebook on the floor, at the warning written decades earlier. Don't acknowledge him. But it was already too late. He had seen him. The son left the house at dawn. He did not take the photographs. He did not burn them. He simply locked the door and walked away. The house stood silent behind him, waiting. Weeks later, sorting through old belongings, the son found something he did not remember keeping. A photograph. Recently printed. It showed the empty house, the back door slightly open. And in the reflection of the window, a familiar figure, standing beside the camera, watching. The son did what his parents could not. He framed the photograph and placed it where it would never be forgotten. Because some things do not survive by being feared. They survive by being seen.